In your book that I think is, could use a little more exposition, is this distinction between a psychological predilection towards something and a social convention. So let's take the example like tipping. Well, in some countries tipping's not practiced. So of course you don't tip. That's a service charge or something built into the record. And the same thing with fairness norms. So I mentioned scalping originally, and scalping, some people thought that was this terrible thing that you buy tickets at a low price and resell them at a high price. But now there are organized markets like StubHub. Everybody expects, well, if I don't use the tickets, I can go into the secondary market. And I don't think scalping is really considered immoral anymore.
Right.
I don't know. What's the audience think? Is scalping immoral?
No.
Yeah. No, nobody thinks. But at one point, that was a view.
No. So look, I think these things. To the specific question you're raising, which I think is a really good one. What the distinction I would make is, what is the cultural norm, and then do people adhere to it? And what the cultural norms are will depend on the cultures. So one of the reasons why Greece is in so much trouble is the cultural norm in Greece is that if you pay your taxes, you're a sucker. That's a problem, right? None of us love paying taxes. Most of us grumble about how high our taxes are, but we think that we have to do it. And I mean, people may be imaginative in thinking of deductions, but basically in this country, people pay most of the tax they owe. And that's not the case in Greece. And so they have an economic problem, but they have kind of a social norms problem. And there's all kinds of discussion about whether they should have more or less austerity. The only way Greece is going to solve their economic problems in the long run is to change their cultural norms. And it's not that I have an answer about how to do that. I kind of know some of the things you'd want to do. Hal knows that I've been doing some work for the British government for the last 5 years. After I wrote with my friend Cass Sunstein the book Nudge, David Cameron created a tiny little government unit called the Behavioral Insights Team that everyone now just calls the Nudge Unit. And it started out with 5 people, it's now over 50. And one of our big success stories early on, I say we because I've been working with that team from its conception, was exactly on collecting money from people owed on their taxes. And we were able to run an experiment. So we met some guy, and one of the very first meetings I had over there was with a guy whose job it was to collect from people who owed money on their taxes. And we say, all right, what do you do? And he says, well, we send them a letter. Dear Mr. Varian, you owe $15,000 on your 15,000 pounds, we'll make that, on your taxes. Here's how to pay. And if you don't pay, we're going to be mean to you. And so we got permission to run experiments of the sort Google does every minute, changing the wording of that letter. And the winning letter uses a trick from the Robert Cialdini Bible. Robert Cialdini is a social psychologist who wrote the famous book Influence. And so what we told people, truthfully, is that the residents, and that we localized this because it turns out that helps. So the residents of Manchester, 90% of the residents of Manchester pay their taxes on time. You are in the minority of those who don't. That increased the percent who pay within the first window, which happens to be 23 days, by 5 percentage points. Now, that means millions of pounds, right? And it costs nothing to add that sentence to that letter. You're already mailing the letter out. And so there are several lessons from that. One is people respond positively to social norms. If you know, what do you do when you go to another country? Going back to tipping, those of us who like to behave, we ask, what's the tipping norm in this country? And then we try to behave the way the natives do. So if everybody pays their taxes on time, you try to behave that way as well. The second lesson from that is one that Google has largely learned, although not completely, which is when you can, you should run experiments.